Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, things adjacent, things in all realms of the world and the universe are somehow attached. And that's the truth, Ruth, to quote a famous movie. Yeah, it's Christmas Day. Did all my family in, my celebrating, my hanging out. Ate a lot of sugar. I feel all right, if not a little bit tired, but not tired in the, like, worked all day and then did 13 other things before going to sleep. Kind of tired, like did some driving, hanging out, ate a bunch of food, that kind of tired. So way different. So yeah, let's just get into some stuff. So it always happens that right after I publish a video, somebody alerts me to a news story that's just like, oh my God, I should have covered that in the last one. And so I didn't have a chance to cover this in the last one, but this is a news story from Russia. The site is called ukwhales.org. The headline is "Orcas and Belugas Held in Russian Whale Prison." From November 6, 2018, reports from Russia's Pacific coast suggest that 11 orcas and up to 90 beluga whales have been taken from the wild and placed in tiny holding pens in a bay near the city of Nakodka. That's it. According to local independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, it is the largest number of marine mammals to be held in this way, and prosecutors are said to be investigating whether the orcas and belugas are being kept in the tiny enclosures illegally. The orcas and belugas may have been captured for sale to Chinese aquariums, despite the fact that permits for capture are only issued for scientific and educational reasons. The Novaya Gazeta report also reveals that the 4 companies renting the small enclosure where these whales are being kept also exported 13 orcas to China between 2013 and 2016. Recently, Russian authorities made several arrests following an illegal whale trafficking scandal involving the capture of several orcas for educational purposes that were then sold for display in countries like China, where the captivity show industry is growing. Because people with money need their entertainment. WDC is working to establish a sanctuary for beluga whales held in captivity, etc. So there's a little video here. I'm going to link this below. You all can check this out. It sounds absolutely terrible. Moving on to Australia. This is from yesterday, December 24th. From The Guardian, Australia heatwave to break Christmas weather records with temperatures up to 47 C. And for those of you playing along at home, 47 C is 116 Fahrenheit. That just makes me feel all warm and toasty just thinking about it. Where are we? Temperatures to reach up to 12 C above average in some parts of Australia, with authorities issuing fire warnings. A heat wave will hit most of Australia this week. That will push Christmas temperatures in some areas to as much as 12 C above the December average before breaking monthly records later in the week. Victorian authorities have issued health alerts for parts of the state, and fire warnings are in place for several other states, including Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania. The Kimberley region of Western Australia is one location that could break heat records on Christmas Day, with the town of Fitzroy crossing, expecting a maximum of 47C, breaking the previous annual record of 46.5C, which was set earlier this month. Inland areas of South Australia will have temperatures in the low to mid 40s. Adelaide is forecast to reach 41C on Thursday. Parts of Victoria are forecast to reach temperatures above 40C toward the end of the week, with Mildura in the state's northwest expecting a top of 46C on Sunday. Other parts of the country could see record highs for December later this week. Generally, for Christmas Day across southern Australia, we're looking at temperatures 6C to 12C above average for the daily maximum, said Sarah Fitton, an extreme weather meteorologist at the Bureau of Meteorology. Yay! All right, I just lost everything on that sentence. It's a little bit cooler for Tasmania and southern Victoria for Christmas Day, but still above average for this time of year. Coastal Queensland is the only region experiencing below average temperatures for this time of year. Temperatures across southern and central Australia and New South Wales will increase from Boxing Day and into the New Year period. The Victorian Health Department has issued a health alert for the Mallee, North Central, Northeast, and Northern Country, which takes in towns such as Bendigo and Shepparton. Okay. In Sydney, temperatures are forecast to reach 34C in city areas on Sunday, 38C in Parramatta, 41C in Penrith and Richmond. That's all I'm going to read of that article. I'm going to link this below. Moving on, I was talking about Poachers the other day. This is from allthatisinteresting.com. This is from July 5th. Maybe we read that. Did we read this? I remember seeing something about this, and maybe... Did I read this or did I not read this? Anyways, this is from July 5th, 2018, updated July 19th, 2018. So it's not all that new news, but from this year at least. Pride of Lions eats group of poachers alive in South African game reserve. Staff at the South African Reserve found the bloodied head and limbs of poachers who broke in to hunt rhinos. Oops. The lions are the watchers and guardians of the Siboya Game Reserve. Over the last few years, the Siboya Game Reserve in South Africa has faced several intrusions by poachers attracted to the reserve's vast diversity of animals. Now, in what some are calling an act of nature's karma, a group of poachers who broke into the reserve to hunt rhinos has been devoured by a pack of hungry lions. The park's owner, Nick Fox, believes that the group of poachers were eaten alive by the pride of lions sometime between the evening of July 1st and the early morning of July 2nd. And so little of their remains were left, investigators weren't even sure how many people were killed. The only body part we found was one skull and one bit of pelvis. Everything else was completely gone. Yummy. However, they suspect that it was 3 men because they found 3 sets of shoes and gloves. Additionally, typical rhino poaching groups are usually made up of 3 people, and then they have a picture of a lion with bloody face. Siboya is located in the South African province of Eastern Cape. Within its 30 square miles live the 5 biggest game animals in Africa: lions, rhinos, elephants, buffaloes, and leopards. Fox reported that one of the reserve's anti-poaching dogs gave a warning that something was wrong at around 4:30 a.m. on July 2nd. The dog's handler then heard a commotion from the lions but didn't investigate further since it was typical behavior for that time of the morning. Later on, one of the reserve's rangers stumbled upon the bloody remains. The police were notified and together with Siboya employees found gear scattered throughout the bushes. This included a high-powered rifle with a silencer, an axe, and wire cutters, which is a surefire sign of rhino poachers. Rhino horns are appealing to poachers for several reasons. In Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam, rhino horns are in high demand because they are believed to contain strong medicinal properties, where they can go for as much as $100,000 per kilogram, a little over 2 pounds. And with horns averaging around 2 to 7 pounds each, a poacher could potentially make up to $300,000 off a single rhino horn. That's a lot of money. Jeez. On the South African black market, the horn of a white rhino reportedly sells for up to $3,000 a pound, which is not as much. And in other areas like China, the demand for rhino horns, which are made of keratin and ivory from elephants, comes from their increased use in carvings for artwork. Well, no need to shoot poachers on sight if you have lions that will chew them to bits. Yes, karma indeed. Instant karma indeed. Too bad, not so sad. Lastly, I'm going to finish up this video. This may be a little bit longer of a read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read like a section and kind of just keep going until I run out of steam. But this article is titled "Burning Fossil Fuels Almost Ended All Life on Earth, a road trip through the geological ruins of our planet's worst mass extinction." They are talking about the Permian. Anyways, kind of actually, I'll just read it from the beginning because it's not too far from where I want to dive in to the article. Who you with? Starts out, "I'm a science journalist." I said, jolted. Oh, this is by, I'm sorry. This is by Peter Brannon, July 11th, 2017. "I'm a science journalist," I said, jolted from my reverie on the shoulder of I-68 in Maryland, where a crowd of geologists had gathered on a field trip to poke at some rocks revealed by the highway department's dynamite. The rocks, slate gray and studded with pebbles from a punishing ice age, spoke to a mysterious global die-off at the end of the Devonian period, the Devonian period, hundreds of millions of years ago. "I'm researching a book on mass extinctions," I said. "Cool. I work on the end Permian boundary in Wyoming." My ears perked up. He was talking about a line in the rocks that recorded the greatest catastrophe the Earth has endured in its entire history. I didn't really realize there was a "let's go out there. Want to go next week?" This was my introduction to Jonathan Knapp, a PhD candidate at West Virginia University. The surprisingly bold introductory exchange, I would learn later, was not atypical for Knapp, for whom there are no half measures. A week later, I was in his passenger seat on a road trip across the country to Wyoming to see the worst thing that's ever happened in person, the end Permian mass extinction. Imagine you took a random spin in a time machine and ended up in the Permian. Now imagine the time machine breaks down. You slam your fists on the dashboard and a digital red 251.9 MYA dimly flickers and dies. The view out the cockpit window reveals red sand dunes and little else. From what you remember of your geology training, you know that 252 million years ago is just about the worst thing you could possibly read on your display. You kick the door open and holy hell, it is hot. You scarcely believe your breath. As you reach for the latch to slam it shut, you're startled by the thundering roar coming from the other side of the dunes. Curious, you step out into the primeval landscape. There's no life, save a wilting weed here or there, where the dunes give way to barren soils cracked and crusted with salt. The sandblasted husk of some odd creature sprawls across the wastes, its fangs bared. A sole mayfly buzzes in and out of your sight. Its presence in this desolate wilderness is comforting. Scrambling over the red sand and gasping for air, you follow the distant roar. You notice that, though the sun is out, there's a funereal gloom to the day. As you crest the dunes, you see why. A strange ocean spreads out before you, hosting the largest waves you've ever seen. They're eerily backlit and slosh a sickly purple and green. Through the haze and over the rolling ocean, a sublime darkness organizes on the horizon. You walk down to the shoreline and take a few steps into the lapping waters. Drawn toward the enveloping gloom, the seawater is almost painfully hot. There's nothing alive under the waves. There doesn't seem to be anything alive anywhere, really. You squint and marvel at the growing terror on the horizon. You've seen billowing thunderclouds before, but this panoramic tempest seems to tower into eternity. Wild, hot winds begin to whip in all directions. You find it difficult to breathe. Slowly baking, you know you should head back to the temporary safety of the ship. But you linger here all alone on the dimming coast, transfixed by the blossoming apocalypse just over the Earth's curve. A putrid odor begins to ride on the swirling winds, and as you finally turn back in a panic, you pass out. Before long, this doomsday storm makes landfall, and what meager life clings to this country is stamped out for millions of years. This is one vision of what it might have been like to visit the world as it ended a quarter billion years ago during the end Permian mass extinction. The worst moment in the planet's entire history. The nightmare was sketched for me by the head of geosciences at Pennsylvania State University, Lee Kump, whose horror movie speculation was that there might have turbocharged hypercanes of almost unbelievable intensity assaulting the supercontinent Pangea, the result of runaway global warming. These megastorms might have had 500-mile-per-hour winds. Can you imagine that? Filled with poisonous hydrogen sulfide sucked out of a rotting ocean that topped 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Can you imagine that? Admittedly, this is mostly Kump's speculation, but how do we know that something apocalyptic was unfolding then, when the Earth suffered a catastrophe that nearly sterilized the planet? Once magnificent coral reefs built of strange Paleozoic creatures and hosting a party of tentacles, trilobites, and technicolor fish were turned into piles of bacterial slime as oxygen-starved and rapidly acidifying seas spread out into the shelves, killing almost everything in the ocean. This planet's forests all but disappeared for almost 10 million years. With Earth's vegetation destroyed, rivers stopped meandering in narrow channels, instead spilling forth in wide, sloppily braiding torrents. Even insects suffered a mass extinction, their only such misfortune across all of natural history. Meanwhile, an odd menagerie of misfit proto-mammalian offshoots, some rhino-like and lumbering, others lupine and athletic, seem to have been nearly wiped out. Fungus spread across the earth. Wow, insects suffered mass extinction. Sound eerily similar to our current situation. The cause of all this misery, a growing consensus of paleontologists and geologists believe, was burning fossil fuels, though acid rain and a ravaged ozone layer likely played a role as well. Geochemical signals in the layers of ancient rock that capture the global die-off suggest a carbon dioxide-driven global warming catastrophe, one so profound it would dwarf even the extraterrestrial disaster that cut short the dinosaurs' reign almost 200 million years later. Near the top of the supercontinent Pangea in what is now Siberia, a gigantic plume of magma, enough to cover the lower 48 states a kilometer deep, was burbling through one of the most coal-rich regions in the world and covering millions of square miles of Pangean countryside and basalt lava. As the molten rock ponded underground, seeping sideways into the crust, it incinerated not only untold seams of coal laid down by ancient forests in the 100 million years before, but huge deposits of oil and natural gas as well. The ignited oil and gas exploded at the surface, leaving behind half-mile craters. The volcanoes injected as much as 40,000 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. This unthinkable volcanism and the greenhouse gases it liberated account for the extreme global warming and ocean acidification seen in the rocks, spanning that dreaded Permian-Triassic boundary. It's even been called the Great Dying. Carbon dioxide, it seems, nearly killed the planet. Let's see. I might skip forward a little bit. Maybe not. I'm just going to read. I'm going to read forward a couple more paragraphs and see where this goes. I actually read most of this article, but that particular scene is what I wanted to read because that is looking like where we're heading. To sum it up in a nutshell. And that doesn't sound too cheery or fun. It doesn't sound like anything that we're going to survive unless, I mean, I'm sure we could survive that possibly in some techno dystopia. Maybe. I don't know if all the money and the technology in the world can keep us going in that kind of situation, but Who knows? Maybe we'll become some kind of like robot, some robot lizard human hybrids that can withstand the next few thousand years. Uh, excuse me. I was picked up at Midway Airport in Chicago in a forest green Jeep Wrangler. Knapp, an oil geologist, had plastered a geological timescale to the center console, and the trunk was filled to the roof with rocks, camping equipment, and two luxuriant wool-lined full-length farwa coats he had picked up in Saudi Arabia. The farwas, he said, would protect us from the brutal mid-continental Wyoming November cold. If having a good conversation partner is the key to a successful road trip, Knapp should be inducted into the Road Trip Hall of Fame. Not only has he accumulated an endless supply of good stories in his young but colorful life aboard oil rigs, from the Gulf of Mexico to North Dakota to Nigeria, people would go up to the pipeline and make holes in it and fill their Zodiac boats with crude oil, in parentheses. But he can illuminate the featureless stretches of Middle America with the revelatory light of geology. Western Kansas is crushingly boring to drive across. I know this because I've driven across it many, many times, but a little less so when you realize its flatness belies a former life at the bottom of the Cretaceous interior seaway, an inland ocean filled with 50-foot-long killer mosasaurs. Knapp can convincingly hold forth on virtually anything you point at, which is exactly what I did as we drove through the long drawing board flat monotony of the heartland. Natural gas compression station, he said, as I pointed to an anonymous facility in the distance. Natural gas pipeline transfer station, he said, when I indicated another and another. Unconventional well pad, he said. It probably goes down a mile and then goes over 2 miles. In the hubbub of New York City or San Francisco, one gets the intoxicating sense that the city streets and skyscrapers are where the business of the country is conducted, that's where the action is. But driving around the heartland with an oil geologist, you realize these glitzy coastal diversions are a facade. The unassuming diffuse infrastructure of flyover land is, in fact, the country's circulatory system, unmarked metal boxes on the side of the highway, inscrutable pipes, and polished valves behind fences at the edge of the prairie. This is the inconspicuous hardware that delivers the glowing screens and cheap meat of modernity. The road trip reminded me that the coasts are separated by a sea, just as they were 100 million years ago, but this one is made of corn and soy rather than seawater. These amber waves of grain are fed by fertilizers synthesized from fossil fuels. The artificial bounty is then transformed into millions of cows crowded on the vast, sweeping feedlots of western Kansas and eastern Colorado that we passed along a 150-mile stretch of road that smelled like shit even with the windows rolled up. In some of these roadside tableaus, the entire modern life cycle was in view, with oil pump jacks bobbing up and down in the middle of the vast cattle multitudes whose farts account for more than a quarter of U.S. methane emissions. Knapp noted that the road we were driving on was made of asphaltene, the heaviest component of crude oil. Food, livestock, electricity, pharmaceuticals, roads, plastic, it's fossil fuels all the way down. ExxonMobil is a chemical company, says Knapp. That's what we forget. Those who rail against the corporate sins of companies like Exxon tend not to appreciate the extent to which their existence, as well as the entire upside-down ecosystem of modernity, anyways, depends on it. And now that we have 7 billion people, most of whom sprang from this artificial surfeit of geological energy, it will be far harder to put that genie back in the bottle than most imagine. But the failure to do so will mean the end of the world as we know it. Knapp's familiarity with burning hydrocarbons and coal was an incidental to his study of the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. It was the kill mechanism. Need petroleum? Knapp asked me, offering chapstick. No industry is more responsible for our knowledge of the ancient Earth than fossil fuel companies, which have funded much of the world's geology research over a century. It makes their calculated and coordinated misdirection on the topic of climate change all the more jarring. At a recent geology conference, sponsors like Hess and Exxon were prominently thanked for their generosity, while climate change activists and academics like Naomi Oreskes and James Hansen were invited to take center stage as honorees and keynote speakers. The energy industry is schizophrenic at its best, staffed with brilliant geochemists who understand the carbon cycle better than anyone on Earth, and at its worst, recklessly following economic incentives into a civilization-threatening tailspin. Knapp provided an insider's perspective on the industry. He champions natural gas as a bridge fuel to a zero carbon economy, certainly a debatable strategy at this late stage in the world's carbon budget crisis, and is the part owner of a drill rig in Michigan, but insists that if we burn all our coal, an end Permian catastrophe isn't out of the question. I think that's all I'm going to read of this, because it is a long article. There's much more of this to read. I'm going to link it below. It's well worth finishing off. But I really just wanted to touch on touch on what the article is talking about, which is where we are headed, where we are headed intentionally. Although, how much intention or maybe stupidity we can claim, I don't know. But we certainly are not doing, with the knowledge that we have about where we're going, we're not doing much to stop it or alleviate the suffering that we are causing other species and eventually ourselves. Hopefully that can change. Who knows? All signs, if I had a magic 8-ball, I'd probably say signs point to no. But if we keep on discussing it, possibly doing something about it, maybe we won't have to get there. Thank you all. I hope you are enjoying your holidays or whatever it is you're doing. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you're just hanging out, enjoying yourself and your life for the moment, and that's okay. That's totally fine. This is a good time to do it. For a lot of people, thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links and the address below. Hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.